Hello, everyone, and welcome to APQC's October KM webinar, How the Digital Thread Can Take Knowledge Management from Lost to Found. So in KM, we're always trying to connect the dots between different pockets of siloed information so we can achieve that more holistic view and hopefully identify trends, patterns, and insights. And I'm very excited to have our speakers today talking about this idea of the digital thread, which is a way to enable some of those activities. And this is an emerging area, so I'm expect to learn a lot today. I know that all of you will have questions and ideas to share, so I hope that you'll put those in the chat as we go along, and then questions in particular into the Q&A panel for our speakers to address at the end of the call. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to our two speakers today. We have Nick Schultz from Cinequa and Martin Vanderos from VDR Group. And they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves, the digital thread, and how all of this relates to knowledge management. So thank you, Nick and Martin.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We're really happy to be here. As Lauren said, my name is Nick Schultz from Cinequa. I handle solutions marketing there, but I have a long history in a variety of different software companies and different kinds of products, including project management software as well. I am really grateful. I'm really acting as, kind of just an MC interviewer here because I think that the star of our show is the experience of our other presenter, Martin Vanderos, who is I'll let him give a little bit more about himself, but suffice it to say, he is someone with a lot of experience in this area and knows a lot about digital thread and is excited about being able to share it. So Martin, do you want to give a little intro?
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you, Nick. Pleasure to be on this call. So very briefly about myself, my organization, VDR Group. It's been a long time solutions organization focused on engineering and manufacturing in particular. The digital thread is a prominent topic in that arena. We've got a lot of experience around the numerous applications that facilitate the process from everywhere from quoting out to product lifecycle management to CAD to ERP, MES, etc. And so in the context of this conversation, it's really about how can we improve, help reduce this so-called cost of quality. And cost of quality is a real topic. As many of you know, it's a top line hit to the profit, right? It's a drain. And so we'll look forward to this session and talking about some ideas, perspectives of how we can ultimately reduce that cost of quality through this theme of the digital thread.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. And yeah, I'm excited about it too. I think we've got some great content to be able to share with you guys today. Now to start, let's start with a quick poll here, just so that we can get a feel for how things are. How familiar are you with the idea of the digital thread? And we'll give you, 30 seconds or a minute to put in a vote here and just be as honest as you can. I know that choice C I've done on some topics before, lying when I think that someone won't ask any more questions. So be as honest as you can so that we can get a good sense of what you know about the digital thread. Speaking of which, digital thread was something that was relatively new to me when I started at Cinequa. For those who don't know, Cinequa is a cognitive enterprise search software that is being used by some of the biggest organizations in the world to be able to bring that knowledge that is buried forward. And when I got hired on about 6 months ago, digital thread was something I dove into really heavily. So I don't blame anyone for not knowing about it, but today is going to be a big step in learning about something that could make a huge difference in your organization. There we go. That's kind of what I was expecting. That I see we actually do have some people using it in their organization, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's mostly The preponderance here of about almost 50% is that we don't even know, is this a futuristic clothing material? I think, and I'm guessing Martin will probably back this up, most of you will see some familiar elements in digital thread just put together in a way that's maybe more holistic and cohesive a way to be able to manage this. So this is exciting. I think that we have a lot of good stuff to share. All right, I'm going to start with a little intro, and then we're going to get into Martin's expertise. This is a direct quote from the head of innovation at Siemens, which for those who don't know, I'm sure that most of you probably at least heard of Siemens, but it's this 170-year-old company, and it's a leader in its field. So take a second to think about what Dr. Lackner means here. Like, think about those vast fields of data that are hidden in servers, hard drives, meeting notes, file shares, emails, chats, PLM tools, project management platform, delivery systems, even in the individual people in your organization, if only they knew what they knew. And as knowledge management professionals, I would assume the answer to this is yes, but have you ever wondered what would happen in your company if you knew what you actually knew? It's probably the kind of question that would keep a knowledge management person up at night. So think about that, hold that thought, think about that idea, and we'll definitely get back to it. Now, knowledge managers know that tribal knowledge is not enough in our modern world. There was a time when I think that it was the dominant way that information was being passed along, but as organizations get more complex, they get larger, they get more people, they get more processes, they get more tools, it becomes so incredibly difficult to rely on tribal knowledge as a way to pass any amount of information about these incredibly complex processes that everyone is undertaking every day. So it's not enough anymore to just have tribal knowledge. That institutional knowledge is starting to go out to the winds. Especially with the expertise that Martin has in manufacturing, we're seeing this in most industries, but especially in manufacturing, that a lot of the older generation, people who are holding a lot of this institutional knowledge, they're disappearing, right? These are just three of the things that could be affecting that and making that tribal knowledge, that institutional knowledge leave. So I'm pretty sure everyone here knows someone who's been in the industry that you work in for 15 or 20 or 30 years. I know, for example, my father is an architect and has been an architect for 37 years, I think, 37 years. I mean, the amount of knowledge that he has about the way that whole area has changed over that time alone is, enough to fill a library. And I think we all know the fear of anticipating the loss of knowledge and experience when someone like that retires. So you got to go on a mad dash. You're trying to capture knowledge and data, and it's already bad enough for knowledge managers trying to optimize business outcome. But the fear that even if it's documented, it'll be impossible to find is a whole nother fear entirely. Second, I'm sure that you've all run into resolving the same kinds of problems over and over. And it's just so frustrating when someone comes forward with a question about some issue, only to have someone else reply, oh yeah, we did that thing 10 years ago, but I don't remember how we did that. I don't remember how we solved that problem. And, if you're lucky, they go and they dig around and they try and find a solution, and, you resolve the exact same problem again. And then, maybe it actually gets documented. It probably doesn't. It gets lost again, or it gets put somewhere where it's not going to be findable. It can just be a gigantic pain in the neck for anyone trying to keep knowledge together. And then finally, any knowledge manager worth their salt knows that it's just as valuable to know what you have as it is to know what you're lacking. And so finding knowledge gaps is going to be crucial to taking the step from an institutional knowledge into something that is a lot more holistic and larger. Now, let's get into the meat of this digital thread. It's definitely a very buzz-generating concept for manufacturing and engineering and some of those parallel industries today. And for a lot of them who are really familiar with it, the buzz is justified. It's, these organizations can turn the digital thread from an idea into reality, and it unlocks a widespread opportunity to improve performance at pretty much every single stage of the product lifecycle, from design all the way to end of life management. And it's really about that kind of metaphorical thread that can link these pieces together. Now that's where I'm going to start talking to Martin, who is the real expert here. To start out everybody on kind of even footing, can you define the digital thread for us and tell us kind of how it should work so that we're all on that same page?
Absolutely. And I'd like to couch this a little bit in the context of products that organizations make, right? There's a wide range of products that can be very simple to very complex products such as satellites and what have you. And as you can all appreciate, and what's represented in this diagram is this theme that there's a number of different applications that process data through this so-called product lifecycle, right? We could argue that it might even back up into marketing for folks that do so-called build to stock, right? I'm going to make 1 million refrigerators, and marketing might have a role in defining what colors and features would be associated that to the order taking for perhaps more build to order or build to engineer type of organization. But nonetheless, there's all these applications that touch this life cycle. And so when we talk about the digital thread, the theme is how could we create this 360 view of data? How could we create the perception of connected data so that when we go from one stage to the next, we're not losing insights and key information through those transitions. So the digital thread is, as the title suggests here, is this a buzz or a blah thing? This is very much a real topic. I think of digital thread as kind of the outcome of enabling technologies, right? The digital thread is this experience that end users, enterprise end users have that allow them to find data regardless of the applications, the data formats, the proprietary formats that exist in the organization, and then be able to get access to that. So I think of the digital thread as this important concept. It is an initiative that companies are undertaking. There's technologies that enable that, and we'll talk a little more about that as this session progresses.
Excellent. A lot of your examples, I think, they come from that kind of engineering, manufacturing, aerospace kind of region. Is digital thread really only applicable there? And of course, that's got to be a marketing guy setup question, right? Or else we wouldn't be here talking. But maybe to put it bluntly, coming from an expert on digital thread, why are we talking to knowledge management professionals and people who are thinking so much about the life cycle of their knowledge and their data about this?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, right? The perspective might come from product, but there's so many other aspects of our business that you all engage with, where there's multiple contributors to final outcomes. And those multiple contributors might generate, author, originate data in an application, in a document, in a PowerPoint, an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it happens to be. And as this progresses, data is being added to the information. And so the theme of the digital thread, I think, can apply to so many other areas of, say, knowledge management, and being able to, as the metaphor, as Nick noted, this metaphor of a thread that ties us together. How do we do that? But it's a real need, I believe. And, there's, of course, technologies that can support that. And, we'll be touching on that as we go along here.
Yeah, I think that's a key piece to this, right? There's just like a needle and thread, they're a tool to be able to accomplish something, but there is a means to be able to start linking these different pieces together. I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't, talk about this and kind of figure out the digital thread in the world of data lakes, data warehouses, and, all of that. So since we live in that world, why the emphasis on digital thread, Martin?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting topic, right? That we talk about this topic of data lakes, data warehouses. There's other channels, and the theme of the digital thread has been pursued for some time now, right? It's not necessarily a new concept, and this idea of how can we bring data together has been tackled in a number of ways. Data lakes is a more common contemporary term that represents many attempts over the last couple of decades in particular to how do we aggregate data? How can we bring data together so we can better understand it? Kind of like the topic we're talking about now, right? Is the digital thread, can the digital thread be solved through data lakes, data warehouses? Well, we could argue that. I look at, and when I work with customers that have implemented these solutions, it really comes from a perspective of how can we better analyze and process data from multiple repository, multiple sources. Not to diminish the value of that, but that tends to be very focused, right? I collect this data, now I apply, remember the term years ago, the big data topic, right? And now I apply analytics to that. I apply other methods to analyze and process that data, but it tends to be focused on a particular area. Moreover, access to that pool of data typically is limited, right? It's not an enterprise solution where I have users across the enterprise as a place for a go-to for the information, right? It's not the primary source of what might be represented as where all the data for a particular product or a particular initiative is housed. It's really geared to this idea of analytics, analysis, processing, very kind of, you can think of it as vertically oriented. Again, not to diminish the value, but it does tackle a portion of what we think of, what I think of as the digital thread. But if we look at it in the context of how does it help the enterprise, the users who want to access, as Nick referred to earlier, content has been created over the years. How do we make sense of that content? This is probably not going to be the avenue to solve that or address that topic.
Yeah. So the data lakes, the data warehouses, these tend to be the domain of maybe what we would call a data professional, right? They're the ones who are accessing it, or they're the ones who are crunching the numbers in there with the analytics. But really, the average end user is not the person who's digging around in something like this.
Yeah, good way to put it. Yep.
Okay. I worked for one of my previous lives. I worked for a company that I characterize as the biggest software company no one's ever heard of. And it's quite a juggernaut. It's got a lot of great products, a lot of great people. And one of the things that was clear to me over my tenure there was the sheer tidal wave of data that company had produced over about 40 years of history. There's so much data constantly in there. So even if you do have a way that's kind of organizing things, the vast quantity of that data is something that is essentially inaccessible to the average person who is executing on a day-to-day plan inside of that company. I assume that that's probably pretty similar to many companies.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to couch it, right? Is all this data, and how can data lakes, data warehouses, data hubs, another term that's emerged, help address these topics. And I think you put it well earlier, these are great tools for the data professional, for the analytics, but may not be the ideal tool for the topic that we're talking about, is disseminating information and making sense of the information, right? How could we better understand what we're taking a look at? So that's where you used the term cognitive earlier. I think that's a very relevant application to what we're talking about here.
Okay, would be fair to sum up that at least one key part, because there's a lot of key pieces to this, but there's one key part to the digital thread is the notion of accessibility.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Now, building off of that, once again, we need to figure out how to place the digital thread inside of this vast landscape of all these kinds of names, notions, and ideas that are happening out there. How does the digital thread relate to the idea of like a digital mesh or a data fabric for anybody who may be familiar with those terms?
Yeah, that's worth. I'm glad you brought that up because we do hear that, right? We do hear digital, the thread, but there's other terms that have evolved, and so I think ultimately, when I think of these terms, right, we're all, I think, pursuing this idea of some kind of desired outcome to get access across and make sense of the data across multiple silos. So whether we call it the digital thread or the mesh or the fabric, I think ultimately it's about giving enterprise users, consumers across the organization, this 360 view of this data that is truly tied together. And users don't want to know that, the information might be in a CRM solution or in an ERP or ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, or Product Lifecycle Management System, PLM, or what have you. They want to understand insights. They're looking for some, what are some insights that I can gain? And so that's what I think of as the desired outcome of this theme of the digital thread, the mesh, the fabric. And of course, next year, there will be a new term that'll evolve. And so, but I think we're all after the same concept.
Yeah, I think that you hit on two things that are key here. The first is, I think pretty much anybody can figure out contextually and really feel the value of something like a 360 view of something, right? Getting every single piece of what you're really trying to get a good look at. But the other thing that really struck me is what you said about the person who's actually got a project. They've got something that needs to get done, right? It's not just about having the data. They have an actual goal in mind, an actual outcome. They don't care where that insight is. They don't care what tool it's in. They don't care where it's being stored. They need the insight now so that they can get the project done. And so for them, it's immaterial where the thing sits. They need to be able to find it.
Right. And there is the other point that we made earlier. What are the enabling technologies that would support that, right? So we're not only talking about data that resides in vertical application silos like ERP or MES, PLM, but there's also data in content. And in the product world, there's data, and I'll dramatize it a bit, data trapped in CAD models. Right? CAD and product are synonymous with each other. You're not going to make a product without using CAD tools, CAD applications. And those environments tend to produce data very peculiar to that format of data. How do we unlock that? And that then begs the question of, yes, how do we unlock that? What's the enabling technology that would allow us to unlock that and aggregate it with these other sources of information? So I think that's the general topic of what you say. Users really don't want to be bothered with where it is, especially in today's world of folks working at home. They're not going to get easy access to on-prem applications. Yes, they can get access to cloud applications, right? So we've got this hybrid environment of infrastructure. And at the end of the day, I just want to get information regardless of where it is, regardless of where it's trapped. That's the key thing. Yeah.
And actually, this is one of those things that Martin and I were able to bond on, and how he and I kind of became friends in this is that as I mentioned, my father being an architect, I was one of few people who was able to talk to him and realize a little bit deeper what he's talking about when we have data trapped in CAD drawings, because I worked for my father during college, doing work. I've seen the vastness of the data that is inside of these CAD files, and knowing that it's really locked away behind a wall unless you have the right ways to approach it. It just feels like a waste. And there's probably 1,000 other types of file formats and data sources and everything just like that, where there's incredible value locked inside of there, if only you could easily access it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's, with that kind of ground laid there, let's talk a little bit about the kind of 3 key parts of the digital thread, and then your insight built on top of that. In the research that we've seen, working with a lot of different manufacturing companies and then speaking to a lot of people, kind of the 3 key components of the digital thread that we've seen are kind of people, tools, and systems. Can you walk us through how the thread touches each of these different areas?
Yeah, so I think absolutely that's a nice way to couch it, is the people, the tools, and the systems. First and foremost, people are ultimately the headwaters of all this data, right? The data that's produced in different applications. We talked about CAD modeling tools. There's analysis, simulation tools, right, in the product world, etc. So folks are all developing this information. And what's interesting about this is, I've discovered that folks are very ingenious. They have a product, they have a responsibility in their organization. So what do, right? They create their own fantastic spreadsheet, or maybe they're developers at heart. And so they go out and get an application tool and build something to support what they're trying to do. They're innovative, but these innovations, frankly, create forms of isolation. And that, is part of the challenge. And so when we talk about tools, moving from people and the way people work, then we have to recognize that there's a host of tools supporting the product lifecycle or the activity lifecycle, the initiative lifecycle, like we talked about. It doesn't necessarily have to be product, but my background, my experience comes from product, which can be a complex series of activities, as we touched about before, and as Nick put up that diagram of different applications that pursue that. So we have to recognize that there are numerous applications that touch the data, that add value to the data, enhance the data, etc. And it kind of reminds me of a shopping cart, of being in the store, right? I start with grocery, maybe produce, work my way up to things that get colder, so they don't sit outside the refrigerator very long. But the point is, I'm moving stuff, I'm collecting information along the process. And now I get into the systems, which is that third part, right? What are the technologies that help me get a hold of this information, that allow me to get insight and understanding? And that is, I might liken it back to the shopping cart, the store. That's the checkout stand. The checkout stand starts to put this into some kind of contents, and maybe puts cold items in one bag, etc. And so we develop these systems to process the data. And those are what I would also call enabling technologies, right? How do we, and I'm sure you're all thinking, okay, this is great, Martin, it sounds like we've got different file formats, proprietary formats, buried content in CAD models. We've got all these applications. How do we get to this, right? And this is the idea of understanding. I've got the system of record. Everyone's heard of that, right? That's PLM or ERP, whatever you happen to be, the system of record. But we have a system of engagement, right? There's an opportunity to engage around this content. And to do that, we need these enabling technologies. And those are represented by things that allow us to get access to CAD model data. How do we harvest it out? How do we create even viewables of that data, right? Someone's in purchasing, they need to get a hold of a particular part design to outsource it. I outsource that data, but I want to include not only the the specs to that, which would be a separate document, but I may want to include a viewable. Well, I'm not going to send a CAD model. No one sends the geometry. I need something that can be rendered and easily viewed and shared with other folks. How do I get into these other applications, right? I can get into, say, PLM or ERP or MES, what have you. But how do I then link this data together? And that's this enabling technology that I think we'll get into a little bit more. But I don't want to minimize that, because ultimately that is the enabler, right? The things that allow us to recognize people and the way people work, as we mentioned, recognize the different tools that people use and where this data is maintained and managed. And then how do we, for lack of a better term, how do we disassemble, assemble so that we can create an environment of engagement around this content?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love the idea of linking this together. In my mind, I think of, at the risk of adding yet another metaphor here, it feels like making a necklace, right? You have all these separate things that are all they're valuable, all these different little gems or something like that, but you're linking everything together. You actually have something that's this connective tissue that lets you start to see things in the whole context, not just one little piece.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit of, maybe this is your chance to do a little bit of techno-futurism here. But first, how well realized do you think the digital thread is in, at least in the exemplar of today's organizations, and then maybe in some of the laggards?
Yeah, good question. So with this whole theme of the digital thread, the analysts coming out, and there's periodicals talking about the digital thread, how are folks exercising that? Well, I think earlier I mentioned, I think digital thread does represent a concept. And organizations are now looking at, yes, this is a real issue, right? If I go back to the cost of quality, people need to drive down the cost of quality. It's a real number. Organizations, analysts will argue that it's 10% of an organization's revenue that is tied up into cost of quality, meaning people are redesigning, people are making errors during procurement, there's scrap and rework, there's expedited shipment payments, there's warranties, even you could argue company reputation and employee morale. I think people recognize the challenges that go with this. Now, how do we solve that? And so I think there's a bit of, and I'd be interested to get feedback, along the way here, but people think of, the data hub, the data lake, we'll use something like that. But maybe part of the challenge here is I don't know what questions to ask because I don't know what technologies are available. And that's why I think this is, I think, going back to the enabling technologies, something like a Cinequa platform, right? Cinequa has this ability to effectively, it's like creating a data lake, but in a format that allows that data to be analyzed, to be made sense of. As Nick said, there's this cognitive capability or machine learning capability, that allows us to put this data together. So, and there's some associated technologies with that, right? How to get proprietary data trapped in CAD models or other formats. But this collective enabling capabilities, I think, what is available today, and I think part of what we're doing here is creating awareness that the technologies are available today. Maybe the question wasn't, the question was known to be asked, how do we do so-called mobile transportation solution on demand, AKA Uber or Lyft, right? Those represented an accumulation of technologies, right? The internet, location services, payment services, etc. Now we have this, we take it for granted. I can get a Lyft at any time on demand. Well, perhaps we didn't even know to ask that question some time ago. Likewise, with this theme of digital thread, how do we solve that? What enabling technologies can we use to address that? And I think that's what's emerging. And the excitement I see in being able to offer some real value to organizations around this theme.
Okay. Along that line, and I realize that the notion of prophecy or prognostication is always kind of fraught with peril, but with the way things are now, how do you expect or what do you expect to see maybe 5 or 10 years from now in the way that we approach digital thread?
Yeah, so I see what's emerging, and I'll say it in the context of Cinequa. Cinequa has done a lot of work in addressing large enterprise pools of data, knowledge, and made a lot of headway in that. Additional technologies are needing to be added, as we talked about before, using the analogy of Lyft or Uber, right? We've got maybe location services. Now we need payment services to close out the capabilities of what's available. So likewise, I think looking 5-10 years downstream, I see this idea of an enterprise platform for consumers across the enterprise to be able to access this data from multiple pools of data, because I've got technology that allows me to organize, make sense of the information. I've got technologies that allow me to tap into proprietary formats, like we talked about with CAT models, technologies that allow me to view that data simply, right? The user doesn't want to necessarily know where does it exist, but once they find it, they want to be able to make sense of it. They want to understand it, which might be a visual, which might be an aggregation of information, a so-called 360 view of data, what have you. So I think we're close. I think that capability is emerging. I think we're very close to seeing that, and something that will then be expanded upon, because we've got other technologies, right? That more cloud-based technologies and other things that we need to address in terms of access. But I think we're close.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And the only thing I'll add from the peanut gallery here is my previous experience in the project management software world. I just remember constantly feeling, I'm guessing that a lot of our attendees here probably have a version of this constant feeling of beating our heads against the idea of all of these different information silos that are happening, and this need to pull everything out of the silos and try and get it into that, that operational system of record, which is a very good notion, like you said. But there's also, I think that there's something to be said that we have these different jewels, these different teams, these different groups who have chosen tools or systems or whatever else for a particular reason. There's something that works for them. And so it felt revolutionary to me to start thinking about the thread that was linking those things together, that instead of saying, hey, all the data has to come out of here, instead saying, we realize there's value in you guys having the space that you do. We still need to be able to see that data. We need to be able to search it. We need to be able to bring it out and get the value from it. But we realize there's value in why you chose what you did. So instead, let's thread these babies together. Let's put these pieces together so that we can pull it out and take a look.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about the impact here, and you talk about how valuable the digital thread can be, can you give a few quick examples of where organizations are seeing the impact of this most when they implement it well?
Absolutely. So being in the space, say the product spaces, manufacturing space that our organization I've been involved with, we like to talk about specific tangible metrics. Efficiencies are great, right? Doing something better, faster, etc. But I think it's important that we recognize what is the potential outcome of pursuing an initiative like that. And in our experience, it really boils down in many ways to this category of this grouping called cost of quality, right? It's very relevant cost. It's the top line. It subtracts, it takes away from the profits. It's a drain on profits. And we said earlier, cost of quality is, by many analysts, have been noted to represent anywhere from 3 to 10% of an organization's revenue. Right. So if you're $100 million company And let's cut the difference. It's 5%. So you're spending $5 million on cost to quality, meaning you're redesigning parts where you've already had the parts that you made earlier, right? Engineers want to be innovative. Purchasing might make an error. And so what do you get? You get scrap, you get rework. Potential downstream impact is delayed schedules, meaning expedited shipments, right? We have automotive suppliers that might have to rent 747 hauling parts from China to Detroit. That's expensive because I've fallen behind in schedule for whatever reasons. Or then, right, we get the warranty issues, the quality impact downstream in the field. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe even company reputation and employee morale. But the cost of quality for those other ones that I mentioned are very real. So if an organization, $100 million organization, is spending $5 million chasing down this cost of quality, incurring these costs, and we can make improvements on that, say 10, 15, 20% cut, that's a very real, tangible, noted value that can be brought to the table. So I think that's the impact. Yes, there's many other things that come out of that. The efficiencies, company organizations find, or folks find what they want, when they want it, et cetera, et cetera. But I would argue that especially if we get to the folks that are concerned about the P&L, how do we dent this cost of quality? So I think that's a very real impact there, Nick.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lining up where's that line item? Find that line item that can really pay for this. Because like you said, there's so many satellite pieces of value here, but they all connect into that idea that what if we could do everything we're doing more efficiently for less money with less frustration and better a better handle on the knowledge we have in our organization, so we just continue to get better over time.
Yeah
Absolutely. And I want to throw a couple of quick stats our way as we're thinking about this. In environments where this digital thread idea and what Martin's talking about is unrealized, it's really hard to find the right information when you need it fast. I'm sure I'm not telling anybody any news that they haven't heard before, but the losses in productivity and time to market and everything else related to it are staggering. One of our favorite stats is from IDC saying that knowledge workers are spending 25 to 35% of their work lives futilely looking for that information that's all caught up in what this digital thread should be linking together. And then maybe even more applicable to some of our audience, the people we were talking about earlier, the data professionals, it's even worse for them. IDC is estimating that they're losing up to 50% of their week in the search for and the duplication of data that already exists. So it's interesting to note. And I do wonder how it aligns with the experience of our viewers here today. With the people you talk to, Martin, like what have you been seeing? Do you feel like this aligns too with what you see?
Absolutely, right? This is, I think you hit it on the head. And what are the manifestations of that? That's what we were talking about earlier, right? The impact is a dent in the cost of quality, or an accumulation to the cost of quality, ultimately, by not having or the impact that's being produced because I can't get to what I need. Yep.
Exactly right. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to tell a quick true story just about an organization like this. It was a global powerhouse that needed to connect their data. This company is a leading player in just about every major sector of the economy, including energy, healthcare, consumer products, industrial automation, transportation, financing. I mean, just about anywhere. But they knew that they were in need of a solution about 7 years ago, to kind of make that expertise and the information that they had all throughout this company widely available. They themselves tried to start building search-based applications on their own, but it just didn't have the capabilities they needed to support the company's vision for that search kind of platform. And I mean, this was kind of the stuff that they needed to have their platform fulfill. I'm guessing it probably resonates pretty easily with a whole lot of the people here. Now, they did actually come to Cinequa when they just realized that trying to build that was going to be a bear. Some of the results that they saw, 80% of their users are estimated to be saving an hour a day searching for content, at least an hour a day. Cost of compliance, 2% a year, which for them, a large company like this is 83 million euro. 2 to 3%, these little changes, like Martin was saying with cost of quality, even if it's 5%, it can be a massive amount of money over time. 2 to 3% more effective at winning new business because they were able to pull that information out more quickly. And they have an expert finder kind of function where they're able to find experts based not on the hype, but on the data, seeing people who really know a particular area of that company. And I mean, altogether, they're already saving, hundreds of millions of euro just being able to draw this data out of the places that it's been sitting for all of this time. Here's my I wouldn't be, the marketing guy. I truly do actually find this product to be incredible, but I wouldn't be him if I didn't say why people are choosing Cinequa. There's so many of the world's top organizations that are trusting Cinequa and our search capability, along with our partners like Martin at VDR, with the most critical knowledge management, compliance, data discovery, and all those kinds of tasks to share experience, to find the expertise, to improve efficiency, including many of the people that you see here. I know that we're coming down towards the end of our presentation time, but I think that it's clear that those kinds of information gaps are killing knowledge management organizations. We want to have enough time to answer questions to help you start to map that in your own organization. But we don't want those treasure troves of data and thoughts and insights to disappear into what I kind of call a data swamp, right? A place where you can't access it anymore, where it's never going to be heard from again. You want innovation to be at the heart of your business because that's what's going to help you grow. And you want to be able to avoid redoing work, losing all that different data that you've got and burying those ideas. But there are organizations out there who are overcoming these big hurdles and using ideas like the digital thread, linking together all these pieces with technologies like Cinequa, like VDR's connection, that's pulling this data out. It's making it accessible and allowing real actionable insight to be coming out of data that previously was so difficult to find. There are hundreds of different connectors for all kinds of data. You can search any connected data from a single location, make dashboards that actually proactively gather what you need to see, and use machine learning to reveal the connections that would have otherwise been hidden by that raw data. So the value there in truly implementing and realizing the digital thread using these kinds of tools that Martin was talking about is palpable. So it brings us back to that original quote, but maybe with a little change here. Just think about if you had the tools that non-disruptively tied that data together and helped your people know what they know, it would ensure that your knowledge managers, your designers, your engineers, your customer support specialists, IT people, manufacturers, researchers, anybody, right, that they could be able to get up to speed quickly, stop wasting time searching for information, and start addressing that cost of quality, seeing immediate results from the data that's just waiting to be utilized. So, I mean, I know about this. I'm really excited about it. I want to just give enough time for people to be able to ask questions, especially of Martin, who has the expertise here. So I think that I'll hand it back on over so that we can address any questions we have.
Thank you so much, Nick and Martin. I think Christina had a question, and I think you were starting to kind of dig into this piece, but I think she wanted just a little bit more advice about how this would be implemented. And in particular, obviously there's a technology component, what you see as the main technology building blocks, and I think you're headed there. But also, is there a business process element and how you think about putting the processes in place to make this happen effectively, as well as the technologies?
Martin, do you want to take a crack at that first, and I'll
Absolutely.
jump in?
Yeah. So not to dive too deep into the technical details, there's really, think about it, to put something like this together, we want mechanisms that allow us to access data. And more specifically, and I see the question here from Christina, more specifically, it's not only accessing the data, but it's accessing the data at the time of change as well, right? We can import data like a data lake exercise, but we also want to capture changes effectively real time. So something changes in the process, something is added, something is subtracted. We want to be able to get a hold of that. So that's kind of one part of, literally, that's a technology capability. The second part of that is then how to parse the data out into something that can make sense, right? So if we see a CAD model change, if we see something in another product change or simulation, et cetera, or if it's non-product oriented, it might be a spreadsheet or it might be a vertical application. How do I harvest that data and then process it so that I can make sense of it? And then the third stage is what Cinequa does so well, right? It's the cognitive capabilities that allow this data to be massaged, processed, so I can get insights. I can even get answers to questions I didn't know to ask, et cetera, right? So there's that third part of it. So on kind of a, the big picture building blocks is how do I get access to data, in particular at the time of change, number of techniques to do that. How do I process that data once I get it and put it in the context? And process is creating potential relationships as well, right? We didn't talk as much about that, but relationships are a key part of this. And then driving it into this engine that has created a number of, as Nick highlighted, demonstrated proof points of data that can be processed and massaged so that I can get insights and give folks what they're looking for. So technically, that's kind of the way I would break it up, and we can get into more details, of course, to show how that would work. But those are the building blocks.
Absolutely. And one thing I would add as well to that, maybe a concrete example. One of our biggest customers for Christina is NASA. They obviously are an innovation kind of driven organization, but they have a ridiculously huge amount of data in almost every possible format, including, just handwritten notes from people who are climbing all over the Apollo rockets. So they had a huge challenge ahead of them. With a tool like Cinequa that actually they were able to kind of connect things. They were able to go to all of their different systems, including their PLM system, which is Windchill, and connect it to Cinequa. Cinequa more sits as kind of like a central piece to all of this. It acts like a string that connects these pieces instead of pulling the data out of all of them and putting it into a central repository. It's more of just a central thread, or it's more of just a thread that actually goes through all of these data sources and can make that data more accessible. With a system like that, they were able to even scan handwritten notes and things like that. Cinequa's machine learning was able to go through, find the handwritten notes, the diagrams and things like that, and turn it into something that's searchable from a single, computer. But by having all of that located in one place, they were able to, for example, search for very specific parts for booster designs and find stuff that they had not looked at or used for 50 years that is informing currently, things like the Artemis rockets. So having a central piece of software there is, I think, a key part of it. I did see Philip had a question about how you could possibly do this. Sending someone to the moon again. Which I absolutely love. I was just at the Kennedy Space Center last week with my kids. So I love this stuff. To Philip's question, though, I think that what Martin was saying about the different components of the digital thread, when you really get into it, the software, the tool is going to be a crucial piece of it. But a big part of it, too, is the people. right, is the process. So at least to get started on something like that without access to something like Cinequa or Connection to begin with is about the culture of the company, getting people thinking in a way that is digital thread-like. We're not just going to have our little data store here. We're going to start trying to get value and connect these data pieces together over time. And we're going to think that way as a whole organization.
And Nick, can I just jump in with one thought there that I'd love to get your opinion on? I feel like having some standard data definitions in the organization, any kind of enterprise taxonomy is going to make this work easier as you layer technologies on top of it.
Definitely.
So that's the prep work I would suggest for a nascent KM program if you're not at that stage of going out and getting systems in place.
Exactly. The example I used for NASA, for example, right? This is generations of people with completely different taxonomies. It was a huge undertaking. And so something you can do now is exactly what Lauren is saying. Start figuring out those things, because it'll make it easier once you do layer those technologies on. If you have consistency in your organization, in the culture of your organization, in the process of your organization, it will make the technologies that much more efficient and that much easier to implement later.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions that came up, and we are about at time. So I am going to thank you guys for presenting, and encourage everybody to connect with us, connect with y'all, and we'll include all that information. You guys will get a copy of the slides and the recording from today, and I'm sure y'all are happy to answer more technical operational questions if anybody has those.
Huge thank to Martin, by the way, from me. He's a big help.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to participate.
Well, thanks everybody, and I hope to see you at our webinar next month. Take care.
Thank you.